In this episode of the Songwriter Theory Podcast, we are talking about things like the lost art of an intro to a song, the importance of the first line in your lyrics, what a pedal tone can do for your music, and more. And for this episode, we are going off of Fooling Yourself by Styx. Let's talk about it. Hello, friend. Welcome to another episode of the Songwriter Theory Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Joseph Adala. Honored that you would take some time out of your busy day to talk songwriting with me. You could be doing so many other things, which I probably shouldn't remind you, but you could be doing so many other things, but instead you care enough about the craft of songwriting to listen to or watch a songwriting podcast. That's not lost on me. It's not lost on me as well that you chose this one. So thank you for that. I appreciate every single one of you. If you haven't already, be sure to grab my free guide, 20 different ways to start writing a song. I think it's one of the best ways to jumpstart your songwriting, whether lyrically or musically. There are so many different ways to start a song. And often when we get stuck, it's because we have just committed to doing one or two over and over. Start with a chord progression, start with a chord progression, start with a chord progression. Tends to be the most common one, which is why I pick on that one. Sometimes I think people wonder, why does Joseph pick on the chord progression all the time? And there's multiple reasons. One is that is clearly the default to the point that some people don't even question ever moving away from it. And then it's also the easiest way. It's actually the best way if you're writing your first couple songs. But at some point, there are other ways to start a song besides just starting with a chord progression, like a stock chord progression, where you're like, I guess I'll just use 1, 4, 5, 4. Better ways. So songwritertheory.com/free guide. All right, track 1, the lost art of an intro. Last week, something we touched on was the art of non-lazy songwriting. And in a way, this is sort of yet another way to look at non-lazy songwriting. Because an intro is something that now we think of just as, oh, well, it's maybe the piano riff that's in the first verse. We get like 2 measures of it before the singer starts singing. Or maybe we take the music from the chorus and just take the vocals out, and that's the intro to our song before going into the first verse. Some songs don't even bother having an intro at all. The first thing you hear is actually the vocalist with the other instruments. That happens as well. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But having an intro that is distinct from any other part of the song, it's not just something from the chorus or taking the tag after the chorus and extrapolating it into a whole intro. It's not just taking the riff or the bass line or whatever, or the chord progression of your verse, and it's just you haven't started singing yet. But having a intro that is essentially a large song section into itself that is only done once for the intro. That's it. It's just in the intro. It's not reused anywhere else. Is another thing that is a sign of non-lazy songwriting, right? Because who wants to write an intro that you're not doubling down on something? You could just use the piano riff that you have for your first verse, or just use the music from the chorus, and that's most often what's done. But to take the time to write something that even like a lot of people don't even want anymore. A lot of people will talk about, especially if you go to channels or podcasts that are all centered around pop music and how to compete with Taylor Swift and all of that. What they'll tell you, and this isn't entirely wrong, it's just very narrow, you got to get to the chorus before 30 seconds. You know how many people say that? There's probably 10,000 people on YouTube that will tell you that it's a rule. You got to get to the chorus before 30 seconds and definitely before a minute. Sure, if you want to cater to the lowest common denominator, the type of people that don't really listen to music, they just kind of have it on in the background, or when they drive in the car, they have it on just so that they can tap their foot, or people that just think of music as background music while they work now, which is a lot of people, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But should we cater our music to those people? Probably not. Especially if you're somebody that you care about the craft of songwriting and you want to make your song good, and what you don't want is just to cater all of your music just to what you think the lowest common denominator person wants. Which, to me, should be what we all want to do. Which, again, doesn't mean every song should be 10 minutes and have a long... No, I'm not saying that it's inherently good to have an intro that's a totally separate section either. I feel like I say this ad nauseum, but there's always somebody in the comments that's always like, oh, you're saying that a song should be complex. No, I've never said that. I've literally never said that. Some songs are great to be simple, and other songs are great being complex. The idea that simple is good or complex is good is asinine. Both of those things are ridiculous. We should reject them outright. In the same way, having a long intro to your song that's totally different from the rest of your song is not inherently good or inherently bad, but it's something that may fit with certain songs. So, something to consider with this is your music, your song, is taking the listener on a musical journey. I think too often we think too narrowly, like, oh, well, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and all its little derivations. I'll have a pre-chorus in this one. Oh, I won't have a bridge in this one. I'll have a post-chorus instead. We sort of we accept the premise that a song must be those things and barely breaks outside of them. And maybe you don't, in which case, great. But most people seem to do that. And again, I think that song structure exists for a reason. I'm not saying, oh, we should throw out tradition and throw out choruses. No, there's a reason those things exist. They're powerful. They're good. Most of our songs even maybe should follow some form of song structure that at least is not that wild and crazy outside of the norm. That being said, our song is taking people on a musical journey. And sometimes it might be best for the musical journey that we are taking the listener on for there to be a long outro that's pretty disconnected from the rest of the song. Not that it doesn't feel like it's a part of the song, just it's not just copying the chorus or the bridge or any other part of the song. And the same is true for an intro. And a great example of this is Fooling Yourself by Styx, which not only does it not take 30 seconds to get to the chorus, it takes 2 minutes. I think it's slightly south of 2 minutes, like 1 minute, 57 seconds to get to the chorus of the song. The first intro, and yes, I just said first intro, because really there's an intro that it has that's essentially an A-B-A structure into itself. Like literally there's an A-B-A, like an A section, a B section, and an A section again in the first intro of the song before we get to the intro that's just before the singing starts, which has a bunch of advantages. One of them is that allows you, for the radio version, you could cut out that first minute and a half or so, and then you still have an intro to the song that, you know, would be more radio friendly, where people have less of an attention span. But a better way, I think, to think through song structure is thinking about how the music can evolve over time to take somebody on an emotional journey with our music. And to me, an intro is a great way that we can do that, where we're not limited by, well, I don't really have any lyrics for this part. You know, the story doesn't need to be expanded at all. We can not expand on the story because the intro presumably has no lyrics, but still have an addition to the musical story, to the musical journey via an intro. So we're going to play the very long intro and sort of talk it through. So I already mentioned it follows an A-B-A structure where there's an A section, B section, and back to an A section, all before we get to essentially the second intro. So let's take a listen. This is the A section, of course. I would argue this is the second half of the A section, or the answer section, if you will. So we're still in this A section. Now we have a B section, significantly different from that A section. Still in that B section. back to the A section. And this is still just the intro. Now it's winding down. This is what, a minute into the song already? Maybe a little over a minute. And now we have this second intro, which is really what's going to go straight into the rest of the song. Although, for the record, this still is not actually the music that we have in the first verse. It is different. Then we get into that first verse. So, something to consider whenever maybe, because a lot of people, the vast majority of people you talk to are going to give you that 30-second thing, and, oh, it's modern music, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? And those are the same people that will tell you things about, say, on YouTube or, teaching things. Oh, you got to make it 30 seconds and snappy, and you got to jump cut every single thing. And, nobody has an attention span for, an hour-long video or podcast anymore. And those things are just not true, and there's always a reaction in the other direction. The biggest podcast on the planet is Joe Rogan, which averages like 3 hours each, right? And you might be a person, and I don't know, but like any given person listening to this might be a person that really is, if you can't give it to me in a 30-second short, I just can't do it, right? If so, you're in the wrong place, because this is a podcast. It's going to be like an hour. Unless you're watching the clip, which will be shorter, of course. But that's fine, right? Or maybe it's not, but that's a separate discussion. But for every one of those people, there are people that want the extra nuance and want the discussion that you get only from a free-form discussion where you can go down rabbit holes and you can kind of, at the expense of possibly beating a dead horse, you can explain things from different angles so that, maybe one person was like, the first example didn't quite make sense to me. I kind of get it. Oh, but the second example, that brings things together for me. And if you just had one of those examples, I wouldn't have gotten it. Or, there's a certain phrase that you used eventually after sort of trying to figure out exactly what you're trying to say that finally was like, oh, that makes sense. Eureka, light bulb moment. So the same thing is going to be true for music, where, yes, are there people that get bored? I mean, there are people that like switch songs a minute and a half into a song because they're bored with the song. No matter how good the song is, they're just like, we listened to a minute and a half of the song. We're going to move to the next song because I'm impatient. Those people exist. Now, those people, I'm pro freedom, but boy, maybe jail. Maybe jail. It's like that meme from Parks and Rec. Well, it's not a meme. Yeah, scene from Parks and Rec where the guy from Venezuela or whatever is like, undercooked chicken, jail. Believe it or not, overcooked chicken, jail. Anyway, but something to consider whenever you hear this advice is there's always going to be a reaction the other way. There's always people that feel differently, which is why ultimately I think it's worth discussing, in the modern day, what are people looking for, blah, blah, blah. There's some validity, right? I don't think people want us to go back to 60s recording quality. So it probably is important to actually record in a way that sounds good now. And if we just purposefully were like, I'm going to sound like an old Johnny Cash song, like, I don't know, that maybe people would reject. But even that, like, lo-fi exists. You know what I mean? So for all these rules that we can create, try to be unburdened by those. And instead obsess with what is right for my song. If what's right for your song is to have a longer intro that really kind of sets the stage musically for your song or just fits with your song beautifully, and it makes your song 6 minutes long and you think, I can't do that. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And then just as a last thing, for something like this, for the song, I don't know if there's a radio edit for the song because it came out in 1977 and it's not something I looked into, but I presume the second intro that kind of really leads into the song, maybe when they played it on the radio, or maybe today when they play it on the radio, they cut out that first intro. That way, it's the best of all worlds. For the people who still want to listen to an album and experience a song as it was originally written in its full, beautiful sense. You can, listen to this, I believe, 5-minute song, give or take, with that long intro and everything, and it's great. And for all the people who are listening on the radio who aren't big Styx fans or wouldn't ever listen to a full album and they just kind of like give it to me now, you also have that version. Everybody wins. So something to consider for us all is maybe consider in our songs or in the next song, just write an intro that is its own thing. Yeah, it will probably be in the same key as the rest of your song, but otherwise it's its own entity, because that's something that is so rarely done now, and it could be something that is right for your song. I know it's something I want to do. I've actually never done it before either. I'm talking about it because it was something that came up when I was thinking through this song and things to talk about. And I always get excited. Something I think that helps with songwriting is getting excited about, from every song, there's something that we can learn, or there's something where it's like, ooh, I've never done something like that before. And in this case, maybe that takeaway is doing an intro that is its own song section, totally different from the rest of the song. All right, track 2, Cynical Eyes. The opening line of your song is a golden opportunity to set the stage and to get people invested right away. In a way, we could see it as a type of hook. I think too often people have too narrow of a view of hook. And a part of it is that the term hook is an overloaded term, meaning when somebody says hook, there are actually many different things a hook can mean. You could think of it, so even chorus is technically a little overloaded, because chorus is another word for choir. So sometimes you'll be in a chorus, and really what it means is a choir, but also a chorus is a song section. That's not terrible overloading. It's usually clear by context what you're talking about. But hooks are something that anytime you talk about hooks, people are always confused, because whatever their singular version of hook they have in their head is, they're trying to understand through that lens, and it's like, no, not that type of hook. So for instance, some people think the hook is the chorus. Though, like, hook equals chorus, because in some genres, that is how it's treated. I don't think that is, I think it's questionable that they ever even did that, because it makes it unnecessarily confusing, and there's already a term for a chorus. It's called a chorus. So that, I don't know why they did that, makes it unnecessarily confusing, but that is a legitimate thing. A hook also can be a vocal hook, in the sense that, say, in a post-chorus, there'll be a hook that the singer sings. It's very simplistic, it's catchy, it's meant to hook the listener, which every hook is. So that can be a sense of a hook. Another one would be, say, a guitar hook, or a bass line, or a piano riff. Very often, all of those operate as hooks as well. Most often, the guitar one, for whatever reason, is actually called a hook. But when it's bass, we call it a bass line. But really, they all function as the same thing. It is a memorable, short musical thing that is meant to hook the listener. It's interesting, it's catchy, and it hooks you in. Think something like Seven Nation Army or whatever, right? That nobody gives a rip about any of that song, except that technically it's kind of a bass line, but it's technically played with a guitar, right? Like, they just beat that thing to death. That hook basically is that song. That's an extreme version, right? But that's another form of a hook. But another hook is the first line of our lyrics. It's a lyrical hook, because that's your first chance, the first thing you're saying to hook a listener in, to be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Or, oh, the song isn't going where I think it's going. Or, oh, that's an interesting stage that he just set. I wonder where this is going to go. And I think too often we don't think of it as that sort of golden opportunity. And I think we don't think of it from the other side, which is, if our first line is particularly meh or bad, that can lose people right away. They won't even ever get to the chorus. Is it true that chorus lyrics are the most important lyrics of a song? Probably. But in stiff competition with the first line of your song. If there are lines, this is something that, I forget who called it this, but they call it power positions. I think it's the guy who wrote Write Better Lyrics that said this, but He calls them power positions. And the idea is there are certain lines, there are certain lyrics that are just obviously more important than others. And the tendency is like the first line of something is a power position very often, and the last line. It's sort of the whole, everybody remembers how the game begins and how the game ends. Everybody remembers the beginning of your performance and the end. If you screw up in the middle, but you nail the ending, nobody remembers or cares half the time. But if you screw up the end, now you're in trouble. Everybody remembers, even if you played flawlessly, but then the last chord you ended on was screwed up. Everybody remembers that. So, and this is true of basically all things. So it's important to get the first line right. You can lose people right away. I know for me, certainly as somebody who cares about lyrics, there are many songs that I don't get much past the first line because they lose me with how ridiculous the first line is. And immediately I'm gone. I'm out, right? They say something silly, or they say something I see a lot, especially with modern pop, where it feels like they think they're deep and profound, but they're saying stupid, vapid things half the time. Not always, of course, but some songs, it's just like you can tell they think a lyric's brilliant. And you're like, no, it's like, are you 10? Like at 10, that might be brilliant, but you're like 35 and you sound like a 10-year-old. It's not brilliant. It's not profound. It's kind of like comments on YouTube, right? The ones that are like canned the same crap that everybody said a million times. Like, oh, he never misses, right? If you go to any comedy video, the top comment that gets upvoted the most, almost always, is, oh, he never misses. And once in a great while, that's true, but come on, nobody never misses. And like, stop saying it the same way in the same canned response. Like, this is why the term NPC exists, right? It's like, oh my goodness, the amount of people who will say the same comment and it still gets upvoted a million times. Like, oh yeah, oh, he's clever. Like, no, he says the same crap that everybody else says with the exact same wording and no creativity. But anyway, I digress. It's kind of like that. And maybe you know what I'm talking about if you are part of the YouTube crowd. And if not, start paying attention to the top comments of shorts of certain types, and you'll notice that you see the exact same comment over and over and over. Different people, same exact comment. Don't even change the wording slightly most of the time. But your first line in your song is important, and it's a golden opportunity, and it's one that we should try to take advantage of. And there's many ways to take advantage of the power of the first line. For example, one way to do this would be to effectively set the imagery for the song early, as the imagery will carry through the rest of the song. This is something Pat Pattison talks about, who was the guy from earlier. For some reason, I blanked on his name, but Pat Pattison is the one who talks about power positions, I believe, as well. Or is it Andrea Stolpe? It's one of those two. Regardless, it is Pat Pattison that talks about how colors essentially bleed down. It's like if you put paint on the top of your ceiling, gravity pulls it down so that it covers what's below as well. But that wouldn't work in reverse, right? So if you save your symbolism to the end of the song, that doesn't recolor the beginning of the song. It's sort of just a lost opportunity. But if at the beginning of the song you set the stage that we're on a New England ocean and we're looking at a lighthouse or something, that image will carry through the rest of the song. So early in the song, in first lines, is a great time to use imagery right away because that imagery will carry through. You would be surprised at how much imagery will carry through, where you could mention something like a green mountainside in your first or second line, and even if you never even allude to where you are ever again in the song, it colors everything. So it's a very powerful way to use your first line. Another way is to effectively set the stage for the subject of the song, right? Who are you talking to and what are you talking about? What is the song about? Who are you addressing, if anybody? Are you looking at the man in the mirror? Are you looking at a significant other? Are you looking at someone who just broke up with you? Are you looking at someone who you don't know very well and is younger than you, as is true for the song that we're going to use as an example here? But as I sort of alluded to or maybe said before, I do think that the argument can be made the most important lyric of your song is the first line of your first verse. Probably it's still the chorus, but the first line of your first verse is something that's very important. And the opening line of Fooling Yourself by Styx is a great example of how to effectively set a stage. And I think it's a great example partially because it's not overtly profound, might be how I would word this. It to me is a sign of there's always this conflict as artists where, some people will say, oh, simple is the best and simple is better, always simple. And that's one of those things where, like, if you think about it for 5 seconds, you realize that's a ridiculous claim. It's overly simplistic. That's not the case. And people will sometimes say that with lyrics, right? They'll be like, if a 5-year-old can't understand it, the lyrics are bad. Everybody should be able to understand every single bit of it. It's like, well, sometimes to achieve depth, you have to risk losing some people. That's always going to be true. Like, it's just going to be lost on people. Some people just want a popcorn flick. And if you have any deeper meaning to it, it's going to be lost on people. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing to have deeper meaning. It's just, you have to acknowledge that in any art, there's always going to be a risk. The deeper you go, the more profound what you're trying to say is, the more layers to it. People are going to miss some of the layers, and that's fine. And so something that is maybe not talked about enough is sometimes a great lyric is not one that sounds overdone and super poetic with flowery language. Sometimes it is, to all the people who say a 5-year-old should understand it. Sometimes it is. Some of the best lyrics I've ever heard are stuff that is just not something a 5, 10-year-old would understand. It just isn't. And it's beautifully said. The word choices are beautiful. They're precise. They're vivid. They're great. But there's a depth to them that wouldn't be understood by somebody who's 5 or 10. And then there are other ones that say something that is simple, but it still communicates a lot. It still is precise and vivid. And I think the first line of Fooling Yourself is a great example of one that isn't particularly flowery or anything, but it is pretty effective for setting the stage, some good word choice, and is just a really good opening line or two of the song. So we will play it real fast, and then we'll read it and dive in a little bit. So right away, setting that stage, you see the world through your cynical eyes. You're a troubled young man, I can tell. So right away we know who we're talking to, what the dynamic here is, right? He's talking to a young man who he sees as troubled, at least partially due to the fact that the young man seems to see the world through his cynical eyes, presumably by how the young man looks at things, how he talks about things, right? Your cup half empty, right? Based on the way you seem to see everything. You're always pessimistic. You always think it's going to go the wrong way. You always are, whenever something good happens, you think, oh, no, really, it's a bad thing, and people did it for bad reasons. Oh, it couldn't be that the person actually did a kind thing. It must be that they wanted an ulterior motive, whatever. So right away, we have this stage set that this is a song from an older man addressing a younger man because, I'm 31. I wouldn't call another 31-year-old a young man because they're my age. You don't call somebody a young man if they're your age. I've seen 80-year-olds call 50 and 40-year-olds young man because relative to them, they are young, right? So we have the dynamic of older and younger. So it's communicating a decent bit right away, and it's setting the stage for really what this whole song is about, which is essentially saying that, no, there is reason to have hope. You're just seeing everything through cynical eyes. You have the whole world in front of you. You have all you're all potential, not actual so far. You have so many choices that could be made. And, the only one that can stop you is yourself. The most simplistic way to see this song is it's a rah, rah, go get 'em song, right? It's in that general kind of manner. That's the type of song that it is at its highest level. If we're going to be super reductionist and make everything into, one of 5 categories of songs or whatever. So this line is not, there's no really big or difficult words here. It's not super simple, nor is it complex. It's certainly not flowery language. You could say cynical, right? That's a above 5-year-old word, I would say. Troubled maybe is another word that is like it's north of 5 years old. So it's not the most simple way that this could have been said. And I think that's good. You see the world through your cynical eyes immediately sets the stage in such a precise, clear way. It's not going too far into flowery language. It feels like it's just sitting just right. It's saying exactly what it needs to say. And that is something that we need to put more thought into, I think. How we can set the stage better right away in our song with the first line. How can we set up the imagery of the song, perhaps? Or in line with this example, how can we set the stage right away? Who's talking to who? What's the dynamic between them? What is the song sort of going to be about? With a little bit of okay, that's interesting. Because I don't know about you, but the first time I heard this song, which actually was fairly recently, that line sort of drew me in immediately. I was like, oh, okay, you see the world through your cynical eyes. You're a troubled young man. I can tell. Immediately, I was like, all right, I want to know more. And that's not the default for songs for me. The default for songs for me is some like, okay, we'll see where this goes. So think more maybe about your first line of your first verse. If there are certain parts of your lyrics that are worth putting extra time into, one of those places is certainly the very first line of your song. All right, track 3, establishing the tonic with pedal tones. So just to make sure we're all on the same page on what a pedal tone is, I don't want to assume that everybody knows. A pedal tone is essentially just a note that's going to stay the same while the chords around it change. And yes, I know that technically it's a part of the chord and therefore it's a part of the chord change, technically. But essentially it's something like this. If I pedal on C, but do a C major chord, G major chord, F major chord, back to G major, A minor, F major, G major, C, that would be pedaling, right? I pedaled on C. We just kept going with the C, really setting that the tonic is C, 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 which, by the way, is one of the great uses of a pedal tone. A pedal tone is a great way to emphasize this is the root, this is the tonic, especially if we are going to have a song that has a lot of borrowed chords or kind of goes into modes for a hot second. A great way to still keep it clear where the tonal center of your song is with a pedal tone. So not only is a pedal tone something that, yes, it can be a cheap, in quotes, way to get some great sounding harmony. What do I mean by that? I mean, the example I just gave was essentially, we'll do a simplified version of it, but really I did 1, 5, 4, 5, 1, right? Super boring. I bored myself doing that. Not that there's anything wrong with that chord progression, but that's like the most basic, I didn't even do something to make it interesting, just block chords, right? But by doing less with my left hand in the bass, and I just stay on C and I pedal on C and do the exact same chord change, that sounds way more interesting. Even though I actually did less. I did less. The right hand stayed the same. My left hand did less. And it sounds more interesting because of the interesting harmonies that are created when, this is just C major with the C in the bass, which is exactly what you expect. Not that interesting. But this, we got a G major chord with an add 4, essentially, because we're adding the C. And that C is in the bass, so it creates some interesting sounds. And then we have an F major chord that's actually in second inversion, meaning it's not F in the bass or A in the bass, but the third note from the chord in the bass, which in this case being C. So we did less, and we actually got more interesting sounds. That's a beautiful thing about a pedal tone. Even if you understand like no theory, a great thing you can do in your very next song is just be like, oh, okay, I'm going to have the basic chord progression, but I'm going to choose a pedal tone, which, by the way, should usually be the root of your song. So if it's in C major, C. If it's in G major, G. If not, the fifth often works as well, but that's less common. So in C major, you choose G, and G major, you choose D. But pedal tones being a great way to break outside of just diatonic music is another great way to use pedal tones, especially early on when it can be difficult to kind of understand, okay, how can I get to a chord that is not naturally occurring in my key without it sounding weird and unnatural that I got there, and not in a good way. A pedal tone can be a great answer. Or if you have a section of a song that if you just took the basic chords of it, it's kind of unclear what the tonal center is. It's kind of unclear what key is this in really. A pedal tone is a great way to fix this, because when you keep hammering at this note, this note, this note, this note, that helps to make it sound like, okay, this is the tonal center. No matter what, if we think of it in piano terms, no matter what my right hand is doing, like I snuck in a E major chord, which you would not have usually with C in the bass. And yet, it, to me, I used two borrowed chords in there, and I didn't put any thought into whether I built to them in a good way or whatever. But it probably still was pretty clear, okay, but this is still in C major because I just kept hammering on C. If I didn't do that, the tonal center would immediately be like, well, I thought it was in C major, but then he had a D major chord, so maybe it's in Lydian, but then he has an F natural in there, so it's not just in Lydian. Maybe it's a borrowed chord from Lydian. And then there was an E major chord. And if I'm losing you with the terms, don't worry about it. That's not really the point. But fooling yourself by Styx in the verse, I actually thought it was kind of difficult to analyze what key it's in a traditional way, because it just borrows chords kind of often, but it still keeps its clear tonal center, largely because it pedals on the tonic. It pedals on D. The song is in D major, and in the bass, there is this D, 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 D for like the first 10 seconds of the verse before it deviates. So by the time it deviates, it's like we already kind of clarified our tonal center to our ears, so that when it starts to borrow things that aren't naturally occurring in the key, aren't diatonic, when it goes back to D, it's like, yes, this feels resolved, and this feels like this is the tonal center. So let's take a listen to the verse into the chorus, and we will break down what's going on with it. D major, C over D, D major, C over D, and then B flat. And then it goes back into the second verse. All right, so let's break down what we just heard. So the first like 10 seconds of it, maybe 15 seconds, are D major, just regular D major, setting that tonic, and then C major over D, which already is, okay, so I guess it's in D mixolydian, because the naturally occurring chord would actually be C diminished in D major. But in rock music, especially in the 70s, mixolydian was common. So, you know, hearing this, great way to set up mixolydian is you're holding that tonic to make clear, hey, this is the center, D major. And then we have that C major, which is not diatonic, but it would be diatonic to D mixolydian, which, as we talked about last week, mixolydian is just major, flat in the seventh. So D major, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. That's the seventh. So if we flatten the seventh, C sharp becomes C natural. So we are left with essentially the notes of G major with the tonic of D for D mixolydian. So we have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C natural. Back to D. So initially, the song seems to be in D mixolydian, okay? And it's just, there's the whole first part. And then it does something pretty interesting where we've pedaled on D for a while now, and now we finally move that bass note to B flat. And we have a B flat major chord, and then a C major chord, B flat major chord, C major chord, all while pedaling on B flat that whole time. And then we go down again in the bass to an A for the chorus, and the chorus is back to a D major chord, making that tonal center, clear again. This is still in D primarily, whether it's in D major or mixolydian and what it's borrowing from, there's a whole discussion around that, but it certainly is a song that is in the key of D, whether it's in the key of D major, D mixolydian, or, something else entirely is perhaps debatable, but the tonic center for sure is D. And then we have a G major chord on top of that A, D major, which technically would be second inversion D major because we have A in the bass, and then G major chord with A in the bass. So the pedal tone here is a large part of what allows us to kind of go off script a decent amount, where even like the B flat major is, in the context of D major, I guess that would be a borrowed flat six chord, a flat major six chord. That's probably how we would analyze that, because that's not expected in mixolydian, and we already have, set the expectation that it's D major, it's not D minor, so we know it's not borrowed from D minor. D minor would have a B flat major chord in it, but we're in D major, some form of D major. I mean, the tonic is D major. So that we had pedal tones, right? Just hammering home at where the tonal center is for a while before we got to this short sort of rev up with the B flat back to the D major, but with A in the bass. It's just a really effective way that the song never really feels like it loses track of where that tonal center is, even though it certainly is. It's not clear cut D major. It's not even clear cut B or D mixolydian. It's like D mixolydian, but sometimes major when it's convenient, and sometimes it borrows a chord from D minor, even though technically it's in D major or some form of a D major key or mode, because we would say D mixolydian would be a major mode because it still is built around D major as the tonic chord rather than minor. But pedal tones are a really powerful tool. Yes, it's powerful to make your harmony sound more interesting than it otherwise is, just by actually doing less work and moving less with your harmonies. But it also can be a really effective way to not lose sight of the tonic in a song, while also getting pretty loose with some of the borrowed chords and some of the things that we do harmonically. So if you're somebody who's looking to break outside of diatonic, you want to use some chords that aren't in your key, a great way to consider doing that is to build it around either maybe you're still pedaling on whatever that note is, right? So in this case, I have the C major, which if you consider this D major by default, already we have something unexpected that would really be mixolydian. But the fact that we're still D here makes it clear. If we did D, now you're probably thinking, oh, maybe it's G major, right? Because we just did 5, 4, 1 of G major. But instead we pedal on D, which helps to kind of emphasize, nope, This is in D major or some form of D major, D mixolydian, in a way that just changing the bass note, you kind of want to resolve there. But if we have, that still sounds a little bit resolved, right? So, but it sounds less clearly, oh, this, to me, like immediately I'm like, oh, it's just in G major. But it's not in G major, it's in D major. So there's other things in the song. Highly encourage you to check out the sheet music for it, or just look it up on ultimateguitar.com or whatever. Try to find one that is correct. They have a couple that are basically correct, and if you play it along with the song, it sounds right. And see some of the stuff that they do. There's some interesting stuff in here. And again, I think the important takeaway is in your song, use pedal tones, man. Pedal tones can be a really powerful addition to your songwriting. All right, track 4, why your musical skills matter. So the great news is with the improvement and growth of technology, the barrier to entry of music writing and music production has lowered a ton, right? In the 50s, if you wanted to have any recording of your music at all, you had to get a record deal, basically, right? Or have tons and tons and tons of money. Now, you could be like, if you live in America, you can have recordings of your songs that sound kind of decent and sound better than probably most 50s recordings. I don't care how, like, just the fact that you have access to the internet, you probably can afford it. If you have a big screen TV, that's nice, and above 1080p. If you have a 4K TV, you can afford enough recording software to and hardware and the things that are absolutely necessary to record in some pretty high quality, which is great. I think that's a good thing. So now another thing that we have the ability to do with different things that can help you with writing chord progressions, and you can program your music instead of having to play your music, right? Programming music wasn't really a thing in the 50s. The instrumentalists had to actually be able to play their instrument. Connecting a little bit to a point that Rick Beato made in a live video where I reacted to one of Rick Beato's recent videos. So check that out if you haven't seen it. It's about an hour long, I believe. But really the reaction part's the first half an hour, and I think we go into side discussions based on the chat and things. But be sure to check that out. It's on YouTube. But mostly good, I think, that there is no reason that somebody who can't play an instrument couldn't write a great song. It's another thing I talk about a lot, but it's because it's another thing that I hear get conflated all the time. People will be like, oh, what a great musician they are, when what they mean is what a great songwriter they are. Or they'll say what a great songwriter they are, when what they mean is what a great musician they are. Those two things are not directly tethered. They're not. You could be the best musician on the planet and be a terrible songwriter. It's not the same skill. It's not the same skill. The ability to perform at an excellent level and the ability to write is wildly different. It's wildly different. So it's a good thing that people who maybe are brilliant writers, but really aren't musicians in the sense of that they can play, the piano well or guitar or play at all. That's a good thing, right? We don't want to miss out on great songs because of someone's instrument skill. And just as a comp here, I wouldn't want being a great director to be a barrier of entry for a writer, or camera quality to be a barrier of entry for comedy. So, if you are a great writer of screenplays, who cares if you can't direct? Somebody else can direct for you. And the other way is true too. Just because somebody's a director for a movie, they know how to, get the best out of actors. They know how to manage the production of a movie. They're good at camera angles and camera whatever. That's a totally different skill than being able to write a movie. Totally different. Has no relation at all. None at all. I mean, that's maybe even less related than, we've all seen this. If you work pretty much anywhere, you probably experience this. The most competent person at what you did got promoted, but now they're in a position where they're incompetent because the best software developer does not necessarily make the best leader of software developers. The best person at actually, constructing a house quickly is not necessarily the best person to manage a construction project. Those skills are wildly different. And the same thing is going to be true writing a screenplay versus a movie, or, how good you are with a camera versus comedy, right? If you're funny, you're funny. It doesn't matter how good your camera work is. Example I can think of is somebody on YouTube, Al Jokes, I think he's called. Absolutely hilarious. He's maybe the only person where I'm not that mad when people drop the brainless, oh, he never misses comment, because I'm like, actually, I've watched like 100 shorts and they're all like anywhere from like chuckle to laugh out loud hilarious. It's really impressive. He's very, very funny. His camera work is just with a cell phone, no fancy lighting. It's just him talking to him. And, I forget if he uses like towels on his head or whatever to be like, oh, I'm a girl for this part of the skit or whatever. So I know some people do that. I forget if he does that. But like the production quality is not there, but he's funny. And I'm glad that he has millions of subscribers, and the fact that his production quality is low does not get in the way of what makes him great. He's very, very funny. And I'm glad that we're not like, well, it's not in 4K and blah, blah. Who cares? He's funny, right? So it's a long way of saying I think it's a good thing overall that we live in this world where, yes, you can write songs, you can write great songs, even if you're, not a musician per se. The downside of that is we confuse necessary and helpful. And this is an argument I have with people over and over again, especially when people argue about music theory. Like, oh, music theory is just academic, not helpful. Okay, no, music theory is not necessary. Nothing is necessary. You understanding nothing is necessary to write a song. The question is not whether something's necessary, but is helpful. Will it make you better? Does it give you an advantage? That's the question. And in the case of music theory, yes, understanding music theory will absolutely help. You will be a better musician, a better songwriter after you understand theory than before. 100%. Is it necessary? No, nothing's necessary. It's not necessary for you to be a good singer. Just ask Bob Dylan. But it sure does help. Just ask Freddie Mercury, right? Like, of course it matters. Of course it's helpful. But so the whole discussion of whether something's necessary is a red herring. It's a silly discussion to begin with. Nothing's necessary. Like, the house I live in isn't necessary. I could live outside, but that would certainly be a downer. I don't love my house, but it's way better than living outside and being rained on every night. So we do this a lot. We conflate, we confuse necessary and helpful. So it's unnecessary, but may be helpful to your song to spend more than an hour writing it. It is unnecessary, but may be helpful to learn some music theory so you understand how music works and how to wield it more effectively. And it is unnecessary to know how to play an instrument as a songwriter to be good at an instrument. So it's unnecessary to know how to play an instrument as a songwriter. It's unnecessary to be good at an instrument. But it is 100% helpful to your songwriting to be an instrumentalist and a good one. An X factor in songs can very often be interesting hooks, parts, chord progressions, and very often you're going to get an interesting hook, part, or chord progression by being a competent enough instrumentalist to have improvised that thing. And if you're not able to, most of the people who can't play an instrument, very often their songs are like block chords all day, right? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is limiting because great instrumentalists can do this if it's right for the song, or they cannot do that. They can do something a little more interesting, and they can do things that lean into their musical skills, or that they just wouldn't have been able to write without their musical skills. Maybe the best example of this I can think of is John Mayer. John Mayer has some songs that are super simple, and he could have written even if it was just an okay guitarist. And then there are songs like Neon, if you've ever heard it, where only one of the best guitarists of all time could write that song. Because you have to be a great guitarist to even play that song after years of practice. If you look at the comment section under the song Neon, if you look it up, almost all of them are guitarists being like, this guy is a guitar god. I practiced 10 years, and after 10 years of practice, I can do the first 3 seconds of this, right? So some of them are jokes, and some of them are just people being like, oh my goodness. But, the results are in. Everybody agrees that song is ridiculously hard to play. And if it's hard to play, imagine how much better you have to be as a guitarist to have written it. Because very often, with practice, we can play something that is more difficult than what we could improvise, right? If I practice a song on the piano, I'm able to play a song on the piano from practice that I would never have been able to just improvise, because you can't improvise at the same level that you can play. You can always improvise at a slightly lower level. So for John Mayer to have written that is a testament to how great of an instrumentalist he is. Some other artists that I think their skills with their instrument is a huge advantage to their songwriting. Muse would be another example. Even, the first episode we did with about Vertical Horizon, I think it is not insignificant that Matt Scannell is and has been the lead guitarist of Vertical Horizon. So the songwriter is also a lead guitarist. He's very good at guitar. That's why most Vertical Horizon songs, even the basic guitar part, right, the most watered down version of the song is still not just, it's still an interesting hook or a really interesting guitar harmony thing that's like, oh wow, I don't even know how he came up with that. It's not beat you over the head with it. It's not neon level. Nothing's neon level. I mean, some things are, but very little is. But it still is one of those things where it's like, they would not have written that if the writer of the song was not very good at their instrument. And another example would be Tommy Shaw of Styx. So this song, Fooling Yourself by Styx, is written and sung by Tommy Shaw, who was brought onto Styx to be the guitarist replacement. What does that tell you? That tells you he's a very good guitarist, because there's a big difference between your band having a guitarist and your lead singer can play guitar enough to contribute to the guitars, right? The stereotypical image of it's a rock band and there's 2 electric guitarists, and then the lead singer once in a while will put his acoustic guitar on and contribute. But it's like, dude, you could just take it off and the song's fine. Whatever you're doing is like super simple anyway. The real work is being done by the lead guitarist. So Tommy Shaw was brought on to be one of the lead guitarists, right? He just happened to also be a very good singer and, in my opinion, songwriter. And that is a part of as a thing that allows him to write more interesting songs and more difficult to play songs than he otherwise would be able to do. Because usually you are limited by your playing ability to an extent with how interesting some of your parts are going to be. Again, that's not always true, but it's a tendency. So the higher your instrument skill, the more possibilities you have. I think a great way to look at instrument skill and really all the skills that are deeply connected or a little bit tangential to songwriting is to think of them in terms of what is currently my bottleneck for writing a great song. Because at any given time, there's going to be something that's the biggest block in your way from writing better songs. And chances are, if you don't play an instrument, that is probably your bottleneck. Is it 100% your bottleneck? Maybe not. It could still be lyric writing. It could still be, getting better at writing melodies. Your bottleneck could be something like you just are really not good at writing a chorus that pops, or your bottleneck could be a lack of understanding of music theory. No music theory, so you just use the same most boring stock chord progressions over and over again. There's many different things that can be our current bottleneck for songwriting. And they're going to change over time because hopefully we think about what is my bottleneck as a songwriter right now. Let me address that. So, and one of the things that worth considering is your instrument skill. Absolutely can be a bottleneck. Self-awareness in general is an important skill for growth at anything. And staying aware of what our current writing quality bottleneck is going to illuminate what related skill we should work on to best improve our songwriting. So a good exercise to do before the end of today, unless you're listening to this very late at night, then maybe tomorrow morning, is to really look at some of your latest songs and think, what do I feel most held me back songwriting-wise? What limited me the most with how high of quality I could get with my songwriting? Is the answer that I still don't understand any music theory at all and I still just use the same stock chord progressions? Is it that? Is it that you haven't emphasized lyric writing, so you kind of just throw your lyrics together and your lyrics always are like, it's a struggle to write them, they're never any good, so you always feel like my melodies are great, my song sections are great, my chord progressions are great, my hooks are great, and my lyrics bring my songs down? Then that's your bottleneck. Another one worth considering, is it your instrument skill? If you're very much a beginner at an instrument, or if you don't play any instruments at all, there's a good chance that this is high on your list of bottlenecks, and it's worth attacking. It's worth looking at and saying, okay, how can I get better at my instrument so that I can be less limited as a songwriter? I cannot be limited in the quality I can produce as a songwriter by my lack of instrument skill. All right, chapter 5, how on earth can you analyze a song? So Christopher sent me an email a little while back, and it's a longer email, and he sends a specific song, lyrics of a song and all that. And we're not going to dive into that specific song, but I think a great question he asked in the email is, how do you analyze a song? How do you learn from it? And those two are, one might say it's asking the same question twice. I actually think it's very similar, but it's actually two sides of a coin maybe. So it's worth discussing them, I think. That, and I think one of the most effective ways to learn songwriting is, yes, something like this. Most important is actually songwriting. I've talked about this a million times. If you're going to do one thing in a week to get better at songwriting, actually songwriting is the way to do it. But another great way is to learn from songs, from analyzing songs that you like, analyzing songs you don't like, analyzing especially songs you do like from artists you usually don't like. That can be a great target of like, what is it about this song that I like when normally this artist I cannot stand? But let's address analyzing first. So when it comes to lyrics, I think a good basic framework to start with is identify the central theme first, which usually means look at the chorus first, assuming the song has a chorus. Look at the chorus. Try to figure out what is the central concept this song is tackling, because it's important to understand all the rest of the song in context of its theme, right? If you don't understand the theme or the point, then it's hard to understand a song. This is true for pretty much everything. So many times people will try to like ignore context. Like, no, context always matters. Context is extremely important to basically anything. You know, if you take the context away, you can make anything seem like anything. You can make it seem like this person said something awful, but you're removing the context of it was somebody joking with his friend and he's being sarcastic, right? That's important context. So context is always important. Best way to identify context in a song is song title, worth looking at, right? Is the song title trying to communicate something outside of the song? Sometimes it is. Most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it's just, you know, the most identifiable part of a song, like the last line of the chorus or two words from the last line of the chorus, the first line of the chorus. But really try to understand the chorus first and then understand everything else, all the other song sections in context of the chorus. So from there, a good thing to do, I think, is to analyze what each song section is trying to cover. Is it okay? The first verse is attacking, here's the past, right? We're going back in time. Then the chorus is the present, and then the second verse is the future. Or are we maybe not doing changes in time, but we are changing sort of the main point of each section? Maybe the song, the central theme is love is amazing. And, the first verse centers around romantic love, and the second verse centers around, familial love, right? Love of a brother or sister, or, friends or something. And then maybe the third verse or the bridge covers the love of, your progeny, your children or something. So identifying at a high level, okay, each of these sections, what are they sort of trying to cover at a higher level in a way that you're essentially reverse, if you take the lyric checklist I like to talk about, because I think it's a important, helpful tool, is having steps to work through for lyrics. Breaking it down into baby steps, I think, helps so much. But in that, one of them is essentially to outline and do some prose writing for your lyrics before you even try to write the lyrics. And outlining is one of those things that I think very often people don't do. You would almost always outline a book before you actually write it. That way you have some idea of what happens in this song. What happens in this book? What am I covering? And there's no reason not to do the same thing for a song. But we're essentially reverse engineering the outline by analyzing, right? So theoretically, each song section, you should be able to have one sentence that sort of encapsulates this is what this song section is for. And then, of course, line by line, right? Try to analyze what everything means in relation to the central theme. You can even look up interviews of the artists themselves trying to explain their song. You can also listen to how other people analyze the artist stuff. That's a dangerous game, though, because most people are terrible analysts and read into things what they want to, especially with vague lyrics. The best example of this I can think of is Nirvana. I like Nirvana, but Kurt Cobain in interviews admits that a lot of the lyrics are just like, I don't know, I strung together random poetry. Like it doesn't have a cohesive meaning. But if you talk to the fans, they will swear up and down, no, mosquito and libido has this deep meaning of blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. The artists themselves say no. The idea that you know what the artist meant better than the artist, most of the time that would be just hubris. That's not how it works. So that's a dangerous game, but it may be worth investigating as well. But going straight to the artist, it would be interviews or writings or something like that, better. Especially if the song itself you feel is you're not entirely sure. And none of this guarantees you're going to analyze it completely correctly, right? But this is a good exercise to learn how other songs you like or don't like are constructed. It's a good way to try to figure out what is it about the song that resonates with you. Just because, as a silly example, if you love a certain website, right? Let's just say you think Amazon.com as a store is just the best. Just because you know that you love it doesn't mean you know why you love it, right? Very often people don't even really know why they love things. And one step further is not only understanding why you love something, but being able to reproduce that, right? I mentioned Al Jokes earlier in this because I think he's hilarious. And I mentioned him earlier in the podcast. I think maybe I can talk about why I think he's so funny. I can diagnose it. But that doesn't mean I know how, I can't just go be Al Jokes and be him. It's not like I know how to be him just because I think I maybe can begin to talk about why it is he's funny. And the same is true for songs. So don't take for granted that just because you like a song, you can learn something about songwriting from it. Just be I like this song. Like that's not, you got to analyze further, which is why I'm thankful that Christopher's asking this very good question, because it is an important question. On the musical side for analysis, very often you want to look at the key first. What is the key of this song? Right? Is it C major? Because everything else is in context of that. Even how we analyzed Fooling Yourself today was, with the pedal tones and all that, was like, okay, this is in context of this is really D major at heart. Maybe D mixolydian, there's some discussion there, but D major is the tonic for sure for this song. And now we're going to analyze everything else in context of that. This goes back to something I maybe haven't talked about in a while, but if there are people who are new here, important to say maybe. Understanding something like, C major, G major, A minor, F major, that chord progression sounds nice, or that sounds like X or whatever, is almost completely worthless level of analysis. It needs to be analyzed at a deeper level. Really what that is a 1, 5, 6, 4 chord progression in the context of C major, which is why that sounds the same as say doing a G major and then a D major and then an E minor and then a C major. That fundamentally sounds the same because it is fundamentally the same. They're both 1, 5, 6, 4. So if our level of analysis isn't to the point beyond the point, if it has to be at a higher level of abstraction, I guess is what I'm saying. Understanding things just as like, that's a C major chord to a G major chord. No. We have to understand chords in context of keys. So if we understand, what makes that chord progression super powerful is we are in C major. Okay, so there's our context, C major. And the chord transition is from a G major to a C major. That, in context of C major, is a 5-1. So it's not that G major to C major is inherently powerful, necessarily. There's some truth to that. But the more important thing is a 5-1 is very powerful. That allows us to apply it to any key. We can then take that same principle and be like, okay, so A major to D major has that same fundamental principle, right? Or if we want to do it, right? Same fundamental principle, 5-1 in the context of D major. So it's important to understand and analyze the music in context of the key that it's in, because that's the important way to understand it. It's not about G major to C major. It's about 5-1. And then other things to look for are hooks, bass lines, rhythm that makes you tap your foot, arrangement decisions, right? What instruments they use, how they use the instruments. Those are all things to look for. This is probably going to be an upcoming episode where we dive into some of this a little bit deeper, because this is a big question, right? We could have a whole course on how to analyze music and still, there would be more to talk about. But at a high level, look for the things, what is it you love about the song? It's the guitar hook. The guitar hook's really catchy. Okay, so analyze that part. What is it about it? What's the phrase pattern? Is the hook pattern like A, B, right? Now that's a silly, ridiculous, basic hook, right? But the point is, we can analyze the phrase pattern. That's A. So, there's a difference between A, C, back to A, versus maybe A, B, A, or something, which would be then a C, right? That matters. That matters. So analyzing by phrase pattern, especially if it's something that's hook melodic, right? Understanding there's an A, there's a B, and then it goes back to A, and then it goes to a C or whatever. And then how to learn. So again, huge question, could be a whole course. But as I was saying before, take a concept and abstract it as high as you can to make it useful. As I picked on before, understanding like, G major to C major sounds powerful is a very rudimentary understanding that's not very helpful. If you understand that by nature of a 5-1, that's a powerful transition, right? So in the context of C major, G major to C major, that's powerful. And also understanding it at more than that level as well. Like, well, okay, but why? And a part of the reason is because of what's called a leading tone. A leading tone is when we have one note that is a half step away from another note that it wants to go to, essentially. So G major to C major has this B, C, which is a half step apart, right? There's no note in between them. That's what a half step is. So that's two different ways to sort of understand why that works so well. And because we abstracted it high enough, and the more different ways we sort of understand why 5-to-1 sounds powerful, even that becomes almost like we can get to an abstraction higher than that the leading tone is a part of why that 5-to-1 sounds very strong. We can utilize a leading tone in a place that isn't a 5-to-1 transition and still take advantage of sort of what we took away from a song. And another thing that will happen is maybe there's a cool instrumental or part of a catchy song that you really like. And the best way to, you could say, morally steal something is by not stealing it, but instead understanding in the abstract, what is it they're generally doing that you like, right? Is it, what is it about the melody that you like? Is it the fact that it's a descending melody and it's high enough that it sounds pretty, epic, but it's not so high that it sounds screechy? What is the abstract of what you like about something? For a song, and you think it's really catchy, and you think, okay, the abstract of what fundamentally makes it catchy is the drum beat. So I'm going to use a similar drum beat for my song, but the chord progression will be totally different. The hooks will be totally different, but I am kind of taking the drum vibe from this song. Or is it the two ways that two guitars in a song interact? You really like that. You like the fact that it's almost like dueling guitars. There's two guitars that are playing different riffs, essentially, that kind of go together. One is a low riff and one is a higher riff, and they kind of go together. And something like Diary of Jane, the intro of Diary of Jane by Breaking Benjamin. A lot of Breaking Benjamin songs and a lot of songs by artists like them. But, in the abstract, what is it that's so cool about the thing that I like about this song, or the thing that I think makes this song interesting? I think is a really important way to go. Of course, there's other things that are maybe easier to do, like, oh, this song utilizes organ. I've not thought to use an organ in a while. Organs sound sick. They're super underrated. I should write a song with an organ. There's things like that as well. But at a very high level, that's my answer to how do you analyze a song and how do you learn from it? All right, friend, hopefully this episode was helpful to you. If it was, something else you'll likely find helpful is my free 20 different ways to start writing a song cheat sheet. It gives you 20 different ways to start writing a song. We've talked about sort of a couple of them here where we mentioned things like bass lines and guitar hooks. Great way to break outside of your comfort zone. Great way to write your next really cool song is simply by breaking outside of whatever you normally do when it comes to songwriting. If you always start your song with a chord progression, or you always start your song by writing the lyrics first, or you always start your song with a piano riff, there are other ways to start a song that can be very, very powerful. Great way to mix it up. Great way to get your creativity going. Again, thank you, as always, for listening. I appreciate every single one of you. If you're somebody who gets some value out of this podcast and you feel like you can give it 5 stars, something you can do to help me out a ton is to go leave a kind 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts, unfortunately, is still the one that's going to be most helpful to grow what we are trying to do here with teaching songwriting and a commitment to crafting songwriting and really caring about the craft and not just being all about the, like, how do I make a hit, but actually caring about the art. And if that's something that's important to you, something you can do, again, is to help us out by leaving a kind 5-star review. If you feel like the podcast does not deserve that, something you can do to still help out is, instead of tanking the rating by giving a 3-star review or 4-star or whatever it is you think it deserves, I'm very open to feedback, so just let me know. Joseph@songwritertheory.com. Let me know how I can improve, how I can earn 5 stars from you. I don't want you to just be given handouts. I don't want handouts. I want you to be honest. But So that's another thing you can do to help me out. Thank you again. I appreciate every single one of you, and I will talk to you in the next one.